It's very sweet that you still have your little hobby, Olivia, but when are you going to stop playing around with digital nonsense and get a real job, like your brother? My father, Arthur Vance, delivered the line with a patronizing chuckle, setting down his glass of aged whiskey. We were in the corporate dining room of Vance & Associates, the mid-sized regional consulting firm he had founded 30 years prior. It was the annual Christmas Eve dinner, the night where all familial conversation inevitably turned into a performance review of my perceived failures. The hook was blunt and familiar. My professional life was a trivial distraction. My name is Olivia Vance, and I am 29 years old. While my father believed I was still designing websites for yoga studios, my reality was vastly different. I am the founder and CEO of Ether Corp, a specialized firm that builds hyper-efficient, secure, and fully remote corporate infrastructure, the very future of business operations. For 6 years, I had maintained the facade of a struggling freelancer, allowing my family's ridicule to continue unchecked. My older brother, Julian, 32, was the golden child. He was the heir apparent, working as the vice president of operations at Vance & Associates. Julian was a creature of habit and tradition, valuing handshake deals and physical office space. He rarely challenged our father, and consequently received boundless praise. Tonight, he was basking in the glory of being officially named my father's successor. My background conflict was rooted in generational contempt. My father, a man who saw worth only in brick and mortar, overhead and long hours in a physical office, viewed my entirely remote cloud-based business as flimsy and unserious. He had paid for my expensive MBA only to watch me reject traditional corporate ladders. My choices were a direct personal affront to his legacy. The current event trigger was the public announcement of Julian's promotion. It was meant to solidify the family's future and to send a final, clear message that I was irrelevant to the dynasty. My mother, Clara, smiled thinly, clearly relieved that the succession was settled, and the risk of my digital nonsense contaminating the firm was eliminated. Julian is taking the reins in Q2, my father announced to the small, intimate gathering of family and key executives. He understands real business. He maintains the standards I built: presence, tradition, and personal relationships, not algorithms and coffee shop Wi-Fi. Julian raised his glass. To tradition, Dad, and to the future of Vance & Associates, where we keep our focus sharp and our overhead stable. He then directed a mocking, pitying gaze toward me. Maybe Olivia can design us a nice new logo after we complete the next round of upgrades, provided her little side project allows for it. This was the humiliation scene, maximum emotional low point. I was sitting at the very table where I was expected to applaud the triumph of the past over the future I represented, all while being explicitly reminded of my irrelevance. Julian, darling, don't forget to give your sister a little referral bonus, won't you? My mother added, the casual cruelty of her comment twisting the knife. She needs the income for her art supplies. My father leaned forward, lowering his voice to an instructional tone meant for the entire table. The truth, Olivia, is that you've done nothing with your potential. Vance & Associates is $1 million business. Your career is a $5 hobby. Never confuse the two. The room chuckled politely, affirming the hierarchical cruelty. The dismissal was complete. But they had no idea. The true proof of worth was concealed behind a corporate veil of shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. Ether Corp wasn't a hobby. It was a multinational, specialized consulting firm that had pioneered remote transition strategies for major banks and tech conglomerates during the recent global upheaval. We had leveraged our expertise to acquire distressed legacy firms, liquidate outdated physical assets, and integrate modern digital infrastructure, turning high-overhead dinosaurs into lean, profitable enterprises. Ether Corp's last valuation placed its worth at over $150 million. My personal liquidity was immense, and my professional contacts were the CEOs of the very Fortune 500 companies my father tried to impress. Over the last 6 months, I had been quietly tracking the financials of Vance & Associates. My father's staunch rejection of digital transition and his insistence on costly, unnecessary physical expansion had left the firm precariously over-leveraged and debt-laden. His stable overhead was, in fact, a rapidly deflating financial disaster. The true hidden current event trigger wasn't Julian's promotion. It was the fact that a major private equity bank had just denied Vance & Associates a critical operating loan. My father was in a state of financial panic. a secret he was desperately guarding. I looked at the check in my inner coat pocket, a cashier's check representing my company's operational acquisition fund. Tonight was the night. "You're right, Father," I said, placing my napkin precisely on the table. The room quieted, sensing the shift in my posture. Vance & Associates is a multi-million-dollar business, and I would never confuse it with my career. My career is structured to acquire firms that have confused the two. Julian frowned, annoyed by the cryptic statement. "What on earth is that supposed to mean, Olivia? Are you drunk?" I ignored him, focusing entirely on my father, whose face was beginning to show the strain of his concealed financial terror. "I know about the rejection, Dad. I know the bank denied your operating loan request this week." His face instantly drained of color. The executive partner shifted nervously, realizing his secret panic was now public. How dare you interfere in my private business?" "That's confidential." "It was confidential, yes," I conceded smoothly. "Until your CFO, desperate for a solution, reached out to a private, boutique consulting firm specializing in rapid, high-capital liquidity infusions for distressed legacy assets. That firm, Father, is Ether Corp." Julian slammed his hand down. "You're lying. Ether Corp? That's a major league player. You work for some design studio, Olivia." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single, embossed business card. It bore the simple, elegant logo of Ether Corp, with my name printed clearly. Olivia Vance, CEO and founder. I slid it across the table toward Julian. "Ether Corp," I confirmed, maintaining direct eye contact with my stunned father. "And Julian, I didn't just review your father's financial application. I initiated an aggressive, hostile acquisition process 2 weeks ago, the moment the bank denied the loan. We secured the necessary debt instruments, and yesterday afternoon, we executed the final move." The revelation was delivered with devastating clarity. I stood up, adjusting my simple but impeccably tailored dress, a quiet symbol of the capital they could never see. "Arthur," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life, signaling the shift from daughter to executive. "As of 4 p.m. yesterday, December 24th, Ether Corp has acquired 51% of the controlling stock of Vance & Associates, making my company the majority owner. And as the founder and majority shareholder of Ether Corp, I am now the single, undisputed owner of your firm. I didn't need a loan. I simply bought the entire company out from under you." The silence that followed was cataclysmic, the single defining moment of the turning of tables. My mother made a small, choked sound. Julian leaped out of his seat, knocking over his chair. My father, the proud founder, simply stared, his jaw slack, his face a mask of complete, utter defeat. The immediate fallout was a maelstrom of corporate and familial wreckage. Julian rushed around the table, his voice frantic with disbelief and fury. "It's illegal. It's a hostile takeover. You're my sister. You can't ruin Dad's life for some cheap revenge." "It's impeccably legal, Julian," I countered, calmly retrieving my chair and sitting back down, taking control of the table. I used capital provided by a syndicate of investment firms specifically structured for this type of distressed acquisition. We moved fast, ethically, and without the emotional interference of family. The paperwork is with the board, which is currently meeting in the upstairs conference room to finalize the transition and appoint a new CEO. A new CEO? My father finally managed to speak, his voice a broken whisper. "But I'm the founder. I'm Arthur Vance. You can't just displace me." "You displaced yourself, Dad," I corrected, looking pointedly at Julian. "By rejecting the future. By running a $5 million company with $10 million overhead and calling my multi-million-dollar firm a hobby. I didn't come to you as your daughter. I came as the only person willing to clean up the disaster your arrogance created, and I acquired you because you were the perfect candidate for an Ether Corp restructure." My mother, recovering, tried the predictable reclamation phase, shifting from contempt to desperate ambition. "Olivia, honey, this is brilliant. You're running the company." "Then you must make Julian the co-CEO, or at least the president. He's your brother. He knows the systems." "He knows the old systems, Mother," I replied, my gaze cold. "And his position as vice president of operations has been eliminated, effective immediately. His loyalty to the past is what sank this firm. Ether Corp's model requires a lean, digital-first approach. Julian's skill set is, unfortunately, entirely redundant in the new structure. Julian staggered backward, his eyes wide with horror. Redundant? You're firing me? On Christmas Eve? Your own brother? I'm not doing this personally, Julian. The decision was made by the Ether Corp acquisition team based on efficiency metrics. However, I added, allowing a flicker of the cold justice he deserved. As the new owner, I will approve a very generous 6-month severance package. Consider it a bonus for your years of stable leadership. My father pushed himself back from the table, rising to his feet with a shaking hand. He looked not at the executives or Julian or my mother, but directly at me. You did this for revenge. All those years you were listening, waiting. You let me call your work a hobby so you could spring this trap. You are correct, Dad. I waited. I admitted openly, standing to meet his height. You spent 20 years telling me I had nothing. You told me my career was worthless. You told me my vision was a digital distraction. Tonight, I proved that my vision and my distraction are worth 51% of your entire legacy. I didn't just earn your respect, Arthur. I bought your company and I bought your silence. I paused, allowing the gravity of the shift to settle over him. And yes, the hobby bought the business. My mother burst into high-pitched, desperate sobs. The executives quickly began excusing themselves, scrambling to make contact with Ether Corp's legal team and preserve their own positions. The Christmas Eve dinner was over. The chill that had settled over the dining room had nothing to do with the winter night outside, and everything to do with the sudden, violent death of a long-standing power structure. I watched Julian, my golden brother, still reeling from the redundancy announcement. He stumbled over the chair he had knocked over earlier, his face a horrifying mixture of corporate panic and personal betrayal. He opened his mouth not to threaten or argue, but to plead. "Olivia, please," he choked out, the word sister stuck somewhere in his throat. "We can talk. We can fix this. You don't have to fire me. I'm family. We can run it together. I'll learn the remote stuff. I promise." "The decision is final, Julian." I cut him off, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion he was fishing for. "You had 32 years of life and 12 years on the job to learn the future. You chose to cling to the past and mock the people who saw what was coming. That lack of foresight is why the firm is over-leveraged, and that is why your position is terminated. I gave you the generous severance package. Take it and rebuild your life outside of this building. You'll find no more handouts here." He looked at my father, begging for rescue. Arthur, however, was already a shell, sinking back into his high-backed chair, the fight completely gone from his eyes. He had been so blindsided by the financial reality that the emotional plea of his son was secondary. He knew, instinctively, that the only person who could have saved the firm was the one person he had spent a decade humiliating. I turned to my mother, Clara, who was dabbing her eyes with a silk napkin, her sobs clearly shifting from genuine shock to calculated performance. "Clara, the cleaning staff will be here shortly. Please ensure this room is emptied of personal items. As of now, this space is designated for Ether Corp's transition team. I expect all personal effects, including your family photographs, removed by noon tomorrow. This is an operational building now." "My photographs? Olivia, you wouldn't!" "This is our annual Christmas dinner setting," she cried, clutching a framed photo of Julian at his college graduation. "It was," I agreed. "Now it's a high-value asset, and the dining table itself is going into storage. Ether Corp executives use digital collaboration platforms, not unnecessary overhead. Consider it the first step of the restructure. You get to keep the memories, but you lose the physical space." I walked toward the doorway where a uniformed security guard from Ether Corp now stood. Before leaving, I looked back at the wreckage. Julian standing alone, abandoned by the executives who were now calling my numbers. My mother clinging to furniture, and my father, Arthur, staring blankly at the glass of whiskey, now ruined. "Merry Christmas, Vance family," I stated, a dark, ironic farewell that echoed in the silent, tense room. I left the corporate dining room and walked across the polished marble floor of the lobby. The security guard opened the heavy oak doors, and I stepped out into the frigid air of the parking lot. The storm was over, but the wind was still howling. I didn't look back. The physical space of Vance & Associates, once the fortress of their arrogance, was already irrelevant to me. The weeks that followed were an executive and familial bloodbath. The long-term consequences were devastatingly precise, tailored to the specific arrogance each family member had cultivated. The consequence for Arthur, Dad, and Clara, Mom. Arthur Vance, the proud founder, was officially designated Founder Emeritus, with no operational authority. He was forced to watch as I, through the Ether Corp transition team, systematically dismantled the costly physical infrastructure he prized. I immediately sold the high-overhead corporate dining room, the excess physical office space, and Julian's large, unnecessary executive suite. The only office I kept was a small functional room, which I rarely used, preferring to direct the entire organization remotely, thus mocking his entire philosophy. Arthur's friends and peers, upon learning that I, the daughter whose career he mocked, had successfully acquired his failing company, treated him as a corporate fool. His social standing was demolished. My mother, Clara, tried once more to leverage the connection, requesting a spot on the Ether Corp charity board. I politely declined, sending her a form email, noting that VGEF required board members to demonstrate a proven understanding of modern fiduciary responsibility and technological innovation, neither of which she possessed. They were left with their empty titles and a forced, agonizing retirement, witnessing the complete professional triumph of the daughter they discarded. The consequence for Julian, the golden child. Julian, once the heir apparent, struggled deeply with the reality of being fired by his younger sister. He tried to start his own, competing consulting firm, clinging desperately to his father's old model of handshake deals and physical presence. Predictably, his firm hemorrhaged money, unable to compete with Ether Corp's efficiency and low overhead. He was forced to liquidate his assets, including the expensive corporate condo his father had helped finance. His humiliation was compounded when I, through my legal team, sent him a formal cease and desist letter, politely reminding him that certain proprietary transition strategies he was using were, in fact, Ether Corp intellectual property. He was professionally neutralized by the very intellectual capital he had mocked. He was forced to move to a distant city, taking a low-level, high-travel sales job, finally having to build his own career without the family safety net. 5 years later, Vance & Associates, rebranded as Vance Ether Solutions, was thriving, a lean, fully remote, billion-dollar subsidiary of Ether Corp. Its growth had outpaced my father's expectations by 500%. The annual Christmas Eve dinner was now hosted by me, at a beautiful modern retreat I had established for my top Ether Corp executives. The invitation list was exclusive and consisted entirely of my chosen professional family. My father, Arthur, now 65 and completely retired, requested one meeting a year, always right before Christmas, to discuss the old days. I granted him exactly 1 hour, in my small, functional, virtually used office at the former Vance & Associates headquarters. He walked into the office this year, looking older, his suit slightly ill-fitting, his pride visibly diminished. He sat across from me, sipping the coffee my assistant provided. "The company is doing well, Olivia," he conceded, avoiding my eyes. "Better than I ever could have managed. I see your vision now. The remote model, the efficiency, it was brilliant." "It was necessary, Arthur," I replied, maintaining the formal executive tone. "Your model was unsustainable. My firm saved yours from complete liquidation." "I know," he sighed, running a hand over his face. "I was a fool. I saw your talent, but I saw it through my own outdated lens. I called it a hobby because I was afraid of anything I couldn't control. I am proud of you, Olivia, truly." The word proud was what I had waited 20 years to hear. And now, delivered in this small, sterile office by the man I had defeated, it felt hollow. "I appreciate the sentiment, Arthur," I said, "but your pride is irrelevant to my success. I stopped needing your approval the moment I realized my value was tied to results, not your validation." He nodded, knowing the truth of the statement. "Julian is still struggling. He can't get out of his own way. He misses the firm." "He was given a 6-month severance and an opportunity to rebuild," I stated. "He chose to maintain the ego and the old model. That, Arthur, is his consequence." I concluded the meeting precisely on the 1-hour mark, politely thanking him for his time. As he walked out of the door, I didn't watch him leave. I was already dialing my chief technology officer, discussing the final stages of acquiring a larger European logistics firm, another distressed asset ripe for Ether Corp's digital transformation. The moral closure was achieved completely. My father had spent 2 decades telling me my career was a $5 hobby. I had responded by using the power of that hobby to acquire his entire multi-million-dollar legacy. I hadn't just proven him wrong. I had professionally absorbed his entire existence and built the future he rejected. I had bought the firm, and in doing so I had bought my freedom and my definitive, unassailable worth. The best revenge was sitting in his chair, making billion-dollar decisions in the digital world he scorned. The meeting with Arthur concluded the annual ritual, but the story of the takeover continued to ripple through the family's social and financial circle. The original Vance family name, once synonymous with old-school corporate stability, was now permanently hyphenated with Ether, the symbol of the digital future they had so arrogantly rejected. One afternoon, 6 months after that final ritualistic meeting, I was reviewing the financial projections for Vance Ether Solutions when my personal phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but a subtle pattern in the dialing suggested it might be an unlisted corporate line. I answered. "This is Olivia Vance." "Olivia, it's Julian." The voice on the other end was not the mocking, confident baritone I remembered, but a strained, exhausted plea. "I know I have no right to call you here. I got this number through a friend's old office directory. I'm not calling for money or a job." I leaned back in my chair, turning off my video camera so my CTO wouldn't see the flicker of personal drama on my face. "Then why are you calling, Julian? I made the boundaries clear. I know you did. I saw the Forbes article about Ether Corp's European expansion. You're projected to hit $2 billion in valuation this quarter. It's incredible. Dad just pretends it's all a fluke. But I know better." He paused, the static on the line seeming to reflect his own professional turmoil. "I'm calling because I need to apologize. Not the shallow apology I gave that night, but a real one. I deserve to be fired. I was arrogant and lazy, propped up by a system I didn't understand. Worse than that, I was cruel to you, not just because you were my sister, but because your success made me feel small. I let Dad make you the family punchline because it meant I got to be the golden heir." The raw honesty was disarming. This was the Julian I remembered from childhood. The smart but deeply insecure boy, hidden beneath decades of Arthur's conditioning. "That's an honest admission, Julian. I appreciate it. It doesn't change anything," he rushed on. "I'm still stuck in this high-travel, no-future job in Dallas. I'm still paying back the debt from the condo Dad encouraged me to buy. I'm not asking you to reverse the takeover or give me a job. I just needed to tell you that you were right, and I was wrong about everything. And I'm sorry I let Dad turn me into a cruel reflection of his own fear." "Apology accepted," I said. The words felt weighty, closing a chapter that had been open for too long. "But you need to understand that the consequence wasn't about the money. It was about you and Dad seeing the value in something that didn't fit your traditional mold. You had to learn to build something on your own, Julian. That's a lesson worth more than any severance package." "I'm learning it," he confirmed, a painful acceptance in his voice. "It's just that every time I hit a wall, I remember Dad telling you your career was a $5 hobby, and I realized the depth of the stupidity we all displayed." "The past is a fixed asset, Julian," I reminded him. "The future is where the leverage is. Focus on the future." I ended the call shortly after, feeling a profound sense of closure. The revenge wasn't complete when I signed the acquisition papers. It was complete when the person who profited most from my pain finally acknowledged the truth of my struggle. The emotional weight I had carried since that Christmas Eve dinner had finally lifted. The new normal, and Clara's last stand. The phone call with Julian was the final messy emotional event I permitted myself to handle personally. After that, my focus was purely on Ether Corp's continued expansion. I made the conscious decision to legally sever all ties with the past. I sold the family home that Arthur and Clara still occupied. The property itself was owned by a holding company that Ether Corp now controlled, offering them a fair market price for a smaller, modern condo, effectively forcing their retirement and downsizing. Clara, in particular, took this final move as a personal declaration of war, far more devastating than the loss of the business itself. The day I signed the papers finalizing the sale of the house, my mother showed up at my Ether Corp regional office, a sleek, minimal space that housed only a small administrative team. She bypassed security, her expensive silk dress and designer handbag looking ludicrously out of place next to the minimalist glass walls and digital interfaces. "Olivia, you can't do this," she shrieked, tears blurring her expertly applied makeup. "This house is my life. My garden, my entertaining space, the whole neighborhood. You're destroying our social fabric." "Clara," I said, rising from my desk, maintaining the cool, executive distance I now used with my father. The house was a financial burden and an outdated asset. I have arranged for a comfortable modern apartment to be transferred to your name free of charge. You will be downsizing, but you will be debt-free. Debt-free? We were Arthur Vance. We weren't supposed to be debt-free. We were supposed to be wealthy. We were supposed to pass this legacy on to Julian, not to some digital nomad who runs a business from a laptop. She spat, pointing a trembling finger at the compact ergonomic desk I worked from. That digital nomad just saved your financial future from ruin, Clara. And Julian chose to reject the future, remember? He's paying his consequences. And what about my consequence? She demanded, her voice cracking. My consequence is being forced out of the life I built for 50 years because my daughter decided her personal revenge was more important than her mother's happiness. I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice so only she could hear the full weight of my measured reply. Your consequence, Mother, is living with the realization that the titles, the house, and the social approval you valued above all else were entirely conditional and could be purchased and taken away. The emotional wealth you spent years building on Julian's fake perfection was worthless. Now you get to live in a modern space that requires no entertaining, no pretense, and no performance. You get to finally exist without the need for a social audience. She slapped me, a sudden, sharp, shocking blow across my cheek that echoed in the silent office. It was a purely desperate act of a person who had lost all control. The security officer immediately moved forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. I stood there, feeling the throbbing heat on my face, but internally, I felt nothing but a cool, detached clinical analysis. That, I stated, touching my cheek, was an assault, Clara. A desperate act of a former shareholder attempting to interfere with the assets of the new ownership. You have precisely 5 minutes to collect yourself and leave before I instruct my legal team to file a restraining order that will restrict your proximity to Ether Corp property and personnel, including myself, permanently. She stared at my face, at the cold, unyielding power behind my eyes, and finally truly recognized the unbridgeable gulf between us. She had attacked the daughter, but the response came from the CEO. Clara turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing across the marble floor. I watched her go, not with triumph, but with a profound final sadness for the person she had chosen to be. The door clicked shut, and I rubbed my cheek, then called my administrative assistant. Contact the security team. Inform them that the transfer of the condo keys is to be completed tomorrow morning, and arrange for a corporate therapist to be available for both Arthur and Clara for the next 6 months, paid for by a dedicated, anonymous Ether Corp subsidiary. The legal paperwork should state that the counseling is mandatory to complete the transition of assets. I paused. And arrange for a new security protocol around me. I want a complete block on all personal contact from both Arthur and Clara for the foreseeable future. Use the assault as the basis for the legal protection. I sat back down at my desk, looking at the glowing projections of Ether Corp's next acquisition target, another legacy firm ripe for digital transformation. The past was fixed, but my future was limitless. The mandatory reckoning. The condo keys were transferred the next morning. Arthur, surprisingly, was the one who signed the final documents, his movements slow and weary. He accepted the terms of the mandatory counseling without protest, recognizing it as a final conditional act of financial support. Clara, however, refused to speak to the appointed therapist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, for the first month. She would sit in the mandatory video sessions, stone-faced, staring off screen while Dr. Reed calmly discussed the emotional impact of displacement and loss of control. My legal team used Clara's assault and subsequent refusal to cooperate as grounds for a permanent and legally binding restraining order, which prohibited her and Arthur from entering any property owned or managed by Ether Corp, including the former Vance & Associates headquarters and my residence. The only permitted contact was through Dr. Reed, solely for updates on their financial and mandated psychological stability. It was during one of these calls, 3 months after the acquisition, the Dr. Reed provided a crucial update. Arthur is compliant, Olivia. He's working through the grief of losing his legacy. But Clara, she broke last week. She finally admitted that the only thing she valued was the life of Julian's mother, not Julian himself. The loss of her social status was her true trauma. And Julian? I asked, cutting straight to the core. He's making progress. He took a sales job, which requires him to travel constantly. He mentioned that the high travel load is precisely the kind of work his father used to deride. He calls it earning his digital stripes. He's not happy, but he is independently responsible now. That, Olivia, is success. I spent the next 2 years focused entirely on Ether Corp's global expansion. Vance Ether Solutions, under the leadership of my appointed CEO, became a case study in successful digital transition. We were not just profitable. We were defining the future of corporate infrastructure. The former Vance & Associates headquarters, the marble and mahogany monstrosity that had housed the Christmas Eve dinner, was eventually entirely cleared. The space was deemed redundant to Ether Corp's operational needs and was listed for sale. I, however, made one final symbolic move. I instructed my property management team to renovate and repurpose only the corporate dining room and Arthur's executive office. I bought those 2 spaces back from Ether Corp at market price, through a private trust. I didn't want the whole building. I only wanted the 2 rooms that had defined my humiliation and my father's arrogance. I converted the corporate dining room into a highly secure, minimalist data center, a space where only algorithms and servers resided. The polished mahogany table was replaced by racks of humming processors. The room dedicated to ostentatious, unnecessary meals was now the beating, efficient heart of Ether Corp's global data infrastructure, running entirely on renewable energy. The executive office, my father's former sanctuary, I converted into a personal library and reading room. The heavy oak desk and leather chairs were replaced by sleek, modern shelving and one single, comfortable reading chaise. I used it perhaps twice a year, simply for the peace of knowing it was mine. The ultimate final victory came during a rare, required in-person meeting with a German banking conglomerate who was considering merging with Ether Corp. They requested to tour a physical facility. I agreed, allowing them access to the newly repurposed 2 rooms. I guided the CEO, Mr. Richter, through the humming data center. This room, I explained, gesturing to the floor-to-ceiling server racks where the Christmas table once stood, was once a costly, inefficient dining space dedicated to performance and ego. It housed our largest financial burden. Now it runs our entire global logistics framework. It is the definition of efficiency. I then led him to my library, Arthur's old office. And this room? This is where my father ran the company, believing physical presence equaled worth. I use it now to remind myself that my worth is tied to knowledge and vision, not real estate. As we finished the tour, Mr. Richter smiled broadly. Remarkable, Ms. Vance. You have built a philosophy of business, not just a company. You liquidated the past and converted its most symbolic spaces into the infrastructure of the future. We are delighted to proceed with the merger. That merger made Ether Corp a multi-billion-dollar entity. The headline on the deal closure was exactly what I had worked for. Ether Corp, the hobby that ate global consulting. My father, Arthur, learned about the merger from a business news ticker while sitting in his quiet, small condo. Dr. Reed relayed the final, heartbreaking detail. Arthur had been reading a book on digital infrastructure, a quiet acknowledgement of the world he missed, when the news flashed across the screen. My mother, Clara, tried to organize a final grand family event, a reconciliation meeting, 6 years after the takeover. She sent Julian to extend the invitation. Julian called me from a rest stop somewhere in Nevada, exhausted from a long sales drive. Olivia, Mom wants a final meeting, a real one with Arthur and me, to put the past to rest. I told her it wasn't going to happen. You were right, I confirmed. She asked me to at least tell you why she's doing it now. She said she needs to know she was still a good mother, even if she was a bad executive. And what did you tell her? I told her I can't answer that. I'm busy focusing on my own sales quotas now. But I also told her that she doesn't get to demand absolution from the person she tried to silence. She lost that right. Julian paused, a hint of his old, clear confidence returning. I'm still paying consequences, Olivia, but I'm paying them in cash, not emotional currency. Thanks for that. The story was over. I was now the unquestioned leader of a multi-billion-dollar global entity, running the entire enterprise from an anonymous, unassuming apartment in San Francisco, often working in silence, just as they had commanded me. I had achieved more than financial success. I had achieved definitive professional justice. The hobby had not only bought the business, but had rendered the old world completely irrelevant, transforming the physical symbols of their arrogance into the digital infrastructure of my unassailable empire.